What's good, everybody? I'm the G with a PhD, and you're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. The place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up, no chasers. Now, before I get things started, you know I got to give a shout out to all of the members of the Green Gorilla channel. So let's give them some fanfare and start that process right now. Yes, I'd like to give a shout out to Camp Low, Issa Abdul Zahir, Anthony Taylor, Deshaun Nolly, Ab Media 83, Aaron Lloyd, Leroy Honeycutt, ML Law, Julius Ferguson, Charles Rogers, Black Dog, Brother Love, Ryan Jackson, Infamous Chillin', Randall, Universal 178, Black Swerve 404, Rashid Barnes, Aaron Smith, The Walt Diddy Show, DH, C Truth the Revelator, Gold Professor, The Nameless Protagonist, Black Pill Ned Stark, Arthur Unknown, Odd Collard, Roderick Jackson, Dr. Tiasan Johnson, Damon Harris, Brian Williams, Kalan Jakala, Sherrod Martin, Ricky Dawson, NEU, Cedric Bowman, Truth 7360, BK Born Shahid, James Washington, Hostile Adept, Seventh Coast Dojo, Ronan Martin, Shop Talk Live, WPR1, Roguish the Billmonger, I Care, Force Windu, Lady Miss Thing Green, BGS Ibmore, and Marvin Battle Jr. Thank you for being members of the Green Gorilla channel. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being members of the Green Gorilla channel. And if you are inquiring about how you too can become a member of the Green Gorilla channel, well, here's how. What's good, everybody? I'm the G with a PhD, and you're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel, the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up, no chaser. Today, I want to introduce you to my new membership program that consists of 5 levels where you can invest in the Green Gorilla channel on a monthly basis and receive level-specific perks. Memberships are special because they improve the quality of the content of the channel and will help me to be able to keep the channel going. Now, to participate in the Green Gorilla channel membership program, all you have to do is hit the join button, which is located right next to the subscribe button on my channel page. Now, for all of my subscribers who decide not to participate in my membership program, nothing will change. The content will keep coming the way it always has. Thanks for watching, and be careful out here, people. Bless. Yeah, now that that's out of the way, I also want to give a trigger warning to all of the virgin ears out there. On this channel, every now and then you might hear some profanity or some explicit content. If that's not your cup of tea, I'll suggest you exit stage left right now. But here is the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up, no chaser. And sometimes that may involve hearing some grown folks language that, might result in hearing some profanity, some epithets, some words and verbiage that, you might want to keep away from your kids. So having said that, I want to have a conversation as an extension of what I started off having a conversation about yesterday. And ultimately, yesterday I was talking about democracy and how black people perceive it, how they construe it. And ultimately, that show was a pick-off, or, a pickup, rather, from a show that I did even earlier, whereby I expressed my disagreement with, my lamentations about, my, overall disgust with black people's preoccupation with identifying democracy as voting. Because that's not democracy, man. A lot of y'all think that democracy is going out and voting for a politician or voting on a specific, referendum. That's not democracy, man. That's not the sum total of democracy. That's the minimum, the bare minimum that you can do in order to approach or arrive at the political. That's the least you can do. I mean, and the fact that there are people applauding themselves in the black public that are patting themselves on the back, like giving themselves hip hip hoorays and all of this bullshit about going out to vote for some motherfuckers that's just as racist as the motherfucker you got out of office. I just don't understand the political naivety and the fucking just overall dim-wittedness and dumb fuckery that's going on with black people in politics. I just don't get it, man. I just don't understand it. It's like we're Dingledorfs and shit. Lemmings ready to just walk off the motherfucking cliff. This shit is absolutely fucking ridiculous. Now, we've taken steps backwards. This is not steps forward. These are steps backwards in relation to how we perceive democracy, because it seems like we had more democratic input before we actually were able to vote than we do now, while we actually have the ability to vote. I'm just saying. How is it that a group of people through history have been able to organize, to rally, to boycott, to work in concerted ways in order to countermand racism, segregation, terrorism, cross burnings, house bombings, ransackings? I mean, we were able to corral around a whole host of organizing activities and to countermand all of the evilness that was directed towards us. Now it's all about just going to vote for some white motherfuckers or even some black motherfuckers that aren't even accountable to us. Because we don't hold them accountable, because all we do is go out and vote for motherfuckers. I guarantee you half the people that go out and vote have no idea who the fuck they're voting for at all, and what the people they're voting for voted for at all. You ever seen this, the referenda on the docket or on the bills, like on the docket you got to vote for, and you looking at the shit like, I'm just encountering this information for the first fucking time? That's not democracy, man. It's not. But you got a group of black people right now dancing in the streets like the fucking Wizard of Oz or the Wiz or some shit. Can you feel a brand new day? Because you got a motherfucker who signed a crime bill that sent millions of black men to prison, and a woman who kept thousands of black men in prison, and we gonna sit there and glorify this shit like we actually did some work? Like black people actually put in some democratic work. Motherfuckers dancing around like, can you feel a brand new day? Like, are you serious, man? I'm just asking the question. Are you people serious? You can't be serious. You cannot be serious, man. Oh, well, we had to get out the lesser of the evils. And this the same motherfucker that you see in pictures with all these goddamn Democratic politicians. The same damn person you see in all these pictures. He's a fucking political insider. He used to give money to the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. This motherfucker is friends with these people, man. He got them on speed dial. But us dim-witted niggas, and I got to keep it real, man. Dim-witted motherfucking niggas. Country coon, porch, corn wine sipping, zoot suit wearing niggas. Act like we done did something. Oh, I done cast my ballot the other day. I had to get that racist out of office. And you know why we perceive democracy that way? Because we're not involved in an ongoing basis in democratic activity. We're not autonomous. We don't set agendas and policies for ourselves. We are not a self-governing people. We're not. We are not a self-governing people. I don't want to curse us out, but I just got to tell us the truth. I'm not sitting here, you know, to gain, your acclaim or to get your approval at all. I'm just here to tell you the truth. Now, you can fucking unsubscribe, whatever you got to do. I'm just here to tell you the truth. This shit is sickening to me to see this. Oh, you didn't do shit. You did nothing but go and cast your ballot for the cult of personality. That's all you motherfuckers went to do. That's all y'all did. Y'all didn't do a damn thing. You did nothing significant. You did the bare minimum that anybody is supposed to do within the context of being a member of a democratic society. The bare minimum. But I don't want to go too far left, man, and to issue invectives all night. That's not going to be constructive. So anyway, the last talk, man, I left off giving you an explanation about how to characterize democracy. You can characterize it solely as a market-based economic activity where you go out and you use the logic of strategic decision to vote for the candidate that you consider to be the most representative of your own private and personal interest. Or you can conceive of democracy like a forum where you have a host of people with different opinions. They come together and they have a conversation about not what just is in their personal or private interest, but what is in the interest of the common good. Now, some like to characterize the way that I've just set up these poles or these dichotomies, right? Economic based democracy versus public or, deliberative democracy. Some people say, well, the private is, or economic characterization of democracy is the democracy of modernity, whereas deliberative democracy is the democracy of the ancients. Like what used to happen in Athens or Sparta or Milos or Lesbos. What did the citizens of these polises or poli, what did they come together and do? They didn't just talk about their private interest, what's just good for me. That wouldn't have flown in ancient Athenian society. It just wouldn't have got off the ground. Because if you don't know, economics was looked down upon by ancient people. Money making was beneath them. They didn't think that was highbrow enough. Nobles did not engage in money making schemes. If they want some money, they want resources, they go take the shit. They go rob motherfuckers through force. That's what they did. They didn't sit there and manipulate people through usury, how to get more cash and money. That's not what they did. They wanted gold, they went out and took the shit. They let the money handlers and the money changers take care of that. They let slaves do that work. In case you didn't know. And they were true patriarchs. But I digress. So, what I was trying to do was to give you a distinction between economic-based democracy and deliberative democratic theory. And I talked about the last time a group of philosophers, or a duo of philosophers named Amy Gutman and Dennis Thompson. And what they did was they developed a deliberative democratic theory that they said was going to keep communication going. And I'm going to share, the visual here. I'm going to share the visual here. They basically say that they're going to aim to keep communication going in the presence of potentially deep-seated moral disagreement. And they think that this theory is necessary, this deliberative democratic theory that they come up with, is necessary because of the growing condition of pluralism in Western democratic societies. Pluralism means that there are different people in the context of the nation with differing views about what's right and what's wrong. You got people who are worshipers of Allah, people who are Christians, people who are Catholics, people who are Buddhists, people who are Jainists, people who are Hindus and worship Krishna, people who are pro-life, people who are pro-choice, people who are, that think that marriage only should be between men and women. Then you got people who believe in gay marriage. So you got people in a society with pluralistic ideals about what's right and what's wrong. Now, according to them, to keep communication going, citizens are required to adopt certain principles, regulative principles, to put the brakes on the kind of reasons that can be presented in political fora and policy development procedures. Now, some people say that this kind of deliberative model may be called a pre-commitment model because it requires citizens to be pre-committed to the constraints imposed by an abstract set of moral principles. And the principles that Gutman and Thompson lay out are reciprocity, publicity, and accountability. I'm not going to go over that. If you want to know what they are, you got to go to the old video that I did yesterday. Okay? Now, I'm not going to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of pre-commitment models in general, but I am going to say that one of the main objections to pre-commitment model theories, to Amy Gutman and Dennis Thompson's way of presenting deliberative democracy, is that it requires a strong pre-commitment to abstract and regulative principles. And there's a philosopher by the name of Iris Young. This is her. And ultimately what she says is that, look, the problem that a collective faces and seeks to solve through democratic processes rarely, if ever, receives the formulation that philosophers often give to issues of justice. They don't sit around and think about what the principles of justice are when they got to make a decision. They don't sit back and say, what are the 2 or 3 principles of justice that right-thinking polities ought to accept and to guide their decision-making? And she says that basically constructing the problem in this way invites us to imagine a more abstract and comprehensive decision situation than politics usually exhibits. And even in moments, those rare moments when politics does engage in constitutional discussions, the object of their discussion is not to reach agreement on what the principles of justice are. They design institutions. Most political decisions, however, are more specific and contextualized than constitutional decisions. The outcome of political discussion and decision-making is almost never an idea about what's fair, what's just, but rather about a particular judgment about what actions and policies that are specific or what this collective should adopt to address these circumstances or a unique set of circumstances that a collective finds itself in. They're not trying to figure out what the principles of justice are. So it's in this spirit that I began to turn to another philosopher's idea about what democracy should look like. Now, I'm going to tell you, when I was in graduate school, man, I thought that Iris Young was correct. But then I read a man named John Dryzek, and then I began to believe that she's incorrect. That she needs to think about some things practically from a realistic perspective. But what I am saying is, regardless, if I accept her view of democracy or not, or you accept her view of democracy or not. What I am saying is that black people's understanding and level of sophistication of understanding what democracy is bankrupt as a motherfucker. Because this information is damn near 30 years old. And we're still talking about going to vote for motherfuckers out here. Instead of trying to figure out what democracy looks like, how democracy is impeded, what kind of games are being played to prevent people from being able to contribute to the decision-making process, we're still behind. This is tomfoolery to me. But I digress. So here's what she says. This is Iris Young, okay? She says, the ideal model of deliberative democracy says that all those whose basic interests are affected by a decision ought to be included in the deliberative democratic process. So if a decision is being made that's going to impact your life, you should be involved in the fucking process of decision making. It doesn't take a genius to figure that shit out. If some shit is about to be decided and it's going to have an impact on your life, wouldn't you want to be there to have the ability to impact the outcome of the fucking goddamn decision? It seems fair, doesn't it? She says there are two significant ways to promote the aim. Basically, which is to make sure that if you're affected by a decision, you ought to be included in the process, the deliberative process, and not just be a bystander. She says there's two ways to promote this aim. Number one, you can expand the modes of communication that are deemed acceptable in deliberative democratic processes or fora. And then secondly, she says the active democratization of the state. So what I'm going to do, first off, is I'm going to talk about what expanded modes of communication and how they're supposed to, according to Iris Young, help to meet the aims of allowing people to be involved in decision-making processes and to affect the outcome of those processes. And the next thing I'll do is talk about, right, what democratization of the state is and whether or not it actually allows people to have an impact over the outcome of deliberative democratic processes. Because it's not always clear that that's the case. Now, according to Iris Young, political communication can become exclusionary, meaning that you could be left out in two unique ways. It can happen externally and it can happen internally. Now, when you have external exclusion, it refers to the way the citizens are excluded from the deliberative democratic process. Well, what are some examples of this? Well, there could be backdoor brokering that you're not privy to. Well, guys are smoking cigars and making decisions about your life, and you don't even know what kind of decisions they're making and what kind of conversations they're having. You could be externally excluded by people forming exclusive political committees where you don't have access to what it is that they're discussing. Or it could happen by way of wealthy persons monopolizing and manipulating the mass media such that you only know about a certain set of outcomes or even agenda initiatives. And you don't get to establish or set out the agenda initiatives. So in these kind of instances, citizens are literally locked out, left out, or bought out of the democratic process. But there's also internal exclusion. Now, this is a less noticeable way of leaving citizens out of the democratic process, even when they are present. And this is how this woman, Young, explains how internal exclusion takes place. So, having obtained a presence in the public, citizens sometimes find that those still more powerful in the process exercise a new form of exclusion. Others ignore or dismiss or patronize their statements and expressions. Though formally included in a forum or process, people may find that their claims are not taken seriously and may believe that they are not treated with equal respect. The dominant mood may find their ideas or modes of expression silly or simple and not worthy of consideration. They may find that their experiences as relevant to the issues under discussion are so different from others in the public that their views are discounted. Young refers to these experiences as internal exclusion because they concern the ways that people lack effective opportunity to influence the decisions or, the thinking of others, even when they have access to the fora and procedures of decision making. So you can be present and then people ignore you or look over you and they look at you like, you silly Negro. Oh, look at the nigger. Look at him try to articulate himself and fumble over the English language. He doesn't know what he's talking about. By God, let him have his say. And then we'll get back to the real business after he gets through, stammering and saying little next to nothing. This shit happens all the time. Or if you got somebody from urban environment, you know what an urban environment means, a Negro from the hood that wants to say something and he doesn't speak or talk eloquently like white people who are supposedly imbued and endowed with so much cultural capital that they overlook and gloss over other people's expressions. This is what she's talking about. So according to Young, what you need to do is develop a deliberative democratic model that allows for expanded modes of communication so that people are not internally excluded from the democratic process. So she says, in addition to traditional argumentation, there needs to be an expansion such that greeting, rhetoric, and narrative as forms of communication will be allowed to make deliberative democratic procedures more fair and inclusive. Now, to express this whole concept negatively, when argument is privileged above and isolated away from more common forms of communication, she thinks that the deliberative process becomes more exclusive and less fair. And this is so because not all citizens express themselves most effectively through argumentation. Now, this is what she says. This is what she said. Now, I don't know if you know what an argument is. I think some of you do. Some of you play around and dabble with arguments and logic, and you know some of the logical fallacies out there: bandwagoning, circular reasoning, begging the question, ad hominem, ad baculum, all these kind of like fallacies related to argumentation. But I mean, argument is the formation of a chain of reasoning that proceeds logically and sequentially from premises to valid conclusions. That's what argumentation is. And Young says, yes, it's true. Arguments play an important role in political communication. But she's cautious of privileging argumentation for many reasons. For one, she argues that the people who privilege arguments believe that deliberative activity cannot be initiated without shared premises that everybody accepts. From this perspective, deliberation should start by participants identifying what values they share in common and then proceed by developing arguments based on such mutually shared values or premises. Now, the problem she has with this is that a public that appears to have shared understandings might exclude some needs which do not find expression within those shared understandings. For instance, sometimes expressions about injustice and oppression may be more situated and particularistic than arguments from shared premises allows. So that's the first problem she has with privileging argument. Now, I can say from the personal perspective of the people in the manosphere, we have a lot of arguments that we want to bring to the table, or we have a lot of values and views that most people in this culture at the current moment do not find acceptable. They're not shared values with many people in the Democratic Party. This is the truth. Another thing she says about privilege and argument that's problematic is that privileging argument often promotes norms of articulateness that devalue some citizens' political expressions and discourages their participation in the political process. So if you don't speak the King's English, you still might have something relevant to say and something important and valuable and substantive to say, but you just don't speak the King's English. That's why a lot of times on this show, I refuse to use graduated terminology and to talk like I'm some sort of white boy and I'm some sort of like preeminent professor talking down to people. That's why I don't do that. You don't have to demonstrate your intelligence by using big ass words and acting, like you have a command of the English language that other people don't have. You're just using large words just to demonstrate that you have a wide array of words to utilize. Then you start sounding like T.I. and shit. You start sounding like T.I. Well, when you think about the vestibulary in the commentary, then often it leads to contrary. All that shit is unnecessary. Thank you, T Fitness for the donation. Anyway, she says norms of articulateness favors those citizens who tend to be highly educated and who speak well. Those who speak broken English or talk with different dialects are often taken less seriously than their political counterparts. The response to those who promote this norm is the content of what a person says is more important than the content is articulated. So inclusion and reasonableness requires movement away from the norm of articulateness, which is a norm more attentive to style than it is to substance. Then the third thing she says about privilege and argument is that it fosters the norm of being dispassionate. Now, I've heard that even said here in the manosphere. Why are you getting emotional? Why are you getting emotional? Let's cut the bullshit out, man. Every human being is emotional. And it just matters what it is that's going to trigger your ass, but there's something that will trigger every human being on this planet and will send them off on an emotional motherfucking topsy-turvy mode. I guarantee you. So she basically says, look, privileging argument fosters this norm of dispassionateness, which favors those who remain calm and inexpressive in the presentation of political arguments. In other words, the norm of dispassionateness encourages emotionless delivery of syllogism as the preferred method by which to express political concerns, which is a style typically used by privileged white dudes to demonstrate the objectivity of their positionality. By contrast, those who present passionate arguments that express anger, pain, or fear about specific oppressive policies or institutions are dismissed as irrational, disruptive, and biased. So the response to those who favor the norm of dispassionateness is that emotional or passionate expression directed at specific instances of injustice is not irrational. It's not illogical. It's a natural response to oppression and domination. The ideal of inclusion, coupled with that of reasonableness, requires the consideration of all political expression, even when the expression is passionate or it's embodied. So, in sum, Iris Young says that democratic models that privilege argument tend to foster internal exclusion against certain kinds of expression and make deliberation dependent upon shared values. The norm of articulateness devalues the speech of those who are logically making cases and arguments, but not linearly. The norm of dispassionateness devalues reasonable but embodied expressions, emotions, and figurative language. Finally, deliberation that is dependent upon shared values excludes the perspectives of those who lie on the periphery of that value system. So she says an expanded notion of political communication is required to make deliberative communication more broad and more inclusive. So she introduces 3 other modes of communication to supplement argumentation. That's greeting, rhetoric, and narrative. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into what she means by greeting, rhetoric, and narrative. I'm going to take a quick break so I can catch my breath. And then after that, I'm going to come back and get down to it and get out of here as quickly as I possibly can. So let me break out right quick. I'll be right back. We're back. I'm the G with a PhD, and you're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel, the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up, no chasers. And if you feel like you like the content of the show, please make a contribution and a donation so I can improve the quality of the content of the channel and I can stay motivated. Also, I would like for you to know that you again are on a grown folks channel. So if you don't want to hear some epithets that are vulgar and profuse at some moments, then you might want to go somewhere else, because we keep it real over here. We don't use norms of articulateness over here. We rant and rave and all kind of other craziness. So I want to talk to you a little bit about greeting, rhetoric, and narrative. Which is, as far as she's concerned, these are the solutions to internal exclusion in the democratic process, whereby you could be there, but nobody pays attention to you while you're there. You get overlooked while you're there. Now, I'm going to let you know, for the most part, this is a feminist author, man. Iris Young is a feminist philosopher. And I used to think that this was very important. And I do think that it's still important. It is. You can grab some good ideas from feminist theory. And a lot of it applies to black men. But what I'm going to say is, in the end, I see black men right now being externally excluded and internally excluded as it pertains to democracy in the United States of America. I guarantee it's happening right now. It is happening. But I digress. I want to get into what she says. So, the three modes of communication that are supposed to prevent internal exclusion are greeting, rhetoric, and narrative. So, what is greeting? Young insists that situations of political communication in which participants explicitly acknowledge the other participants are more substantively inclusive than those that do not. For that reason, greeting is an important part of just democratic communication. Greeting moves from beyond the mere presentation of public reasons and directs the presentation of reasons to specific groups of persons. Greeting and the acknowledgement that goes along with it leads to the presentation of reasons that are situated and relevant, as opposed to reasons that are abstract and unconnected to the specific concerns of any particular group. Also, such acknowledgement increases the chances that all parties will equally influence the decision-making process. Now, again, greeting refers to moments where people acknowledge each other in their particularity. Prior to making assertions or pointing out political differences, it is important for people to open up and acknowledge each other. In this sense, greeting is the communicative moment of taking the risk of trusting in order to establish and maintain the bond of trust necessary to sustain a discussion. Greeting is accompanied by vulnerability and risk because there's no guarantee that there will be a reciprocal response to an opening up or an offering of oneself in an initial greeting situation. You can extend your hand out to greet somebody and they could look at you like, I don't want to shake your hand, bro. I don't rock with you. Making the first move in greeting implies the possibility of rejection and potential exposure to disrespect. But without the initial step and the potential for mutual awareness and recognition that goes along with it, discussion rarely gets going. Just think about how simple it is, greeting somebody. A lot of times when you got people who have had arguments with each other, they won't even look at each other. Or they got beef with each other or smoke with each other, they won't even look. They won't even acknowledge the other person's presence. This is what she's talking about. Also, greeting announces that one is ready to listen to others. When we greet others, we take responsibility for our relationship to them, while simultaneously announcing our own distance and difference from them. When we greet others, it is often in the form of ritual displays of politeness. Without such simple displays of recognition and respect, communication would more than likely break down altogether. And this is especially true in the presence of conflict, where greeting is necessary to establish acknowledgement so that the communication can keep going. So greeting basically is a communicative political gesture through which those who disagree recognize each other and include each other in discussion aimed at resolving the disagreement. Adding greeting, and this is just a summation of what I said about greeting thus far. Adding greeting to the kinds of communication acceptable in deliberative democratic theory expands the scope of public reason. Greeting fosters relationships between citizens that require them to do more than offer reasons that they can each mutually accept. Greeting promotes relationships between citizens that require acknowledgement of specific groups in specific social contexts that have specific social political interests and aims. In Young's own words, it is not simply that participants in public discussion should have reasons that others can accept, but they must also explicitly acknowledge the others whom they aim to persuade. Now I got some Negroes, man, out here talking about how is the black male being excluded from a democracy when this is not a democracy. This is a Republican form of government. Have you read the Constitution? Bro, you're light years behind, man. You're having a conversation, but you're behind, bro. You are behind. We've already talked about that yesterday. We talked about all of this yesterday. We had a conversation about it. So you need to go back and watch the old video before you watch this video so you can be brought up to speed. Don't you just love how people jump themselves into a conversation and act like they know more than you about the conversation without having had a holistic understanding of the conversation from beginning to end? But that's what you do when you assume, though. You know what you do when you assume. You know what happens when you assume, right? You know what you do when you assume, though, correct? You know what you do when you assume. You know what you do when you assume. You make an ass out of you. But you're also making an ass out of me. Go do your homework, young grunt. Get your weight up. We doing more than pull-ups, push-ups, and dips over here. So we're talking about greeting within the context of deliberative democratic theorization. We're trying to get black people to understand what kind of norms they should be adopting and how they should be dealing with the situations they're confronted with on an ongoing basis in the context of politics as it stands in the United States. This is what black people ought to be thinking about, not just going to vote for a group of representatives who are not accountable to them, who don't make what they're saying public, and who don't honor them and perceive them as having some sort of impact over the deliberative process in the United States. We're trying to figure out what we should be doing in order to be able to have some impact over the outcome of the decision making that takes place within the context of the institutions that exist in this republic. That's what the fuck we're trying to do. That's what our goal is. Not to be a political football being thrown back and forth between one party and the next. Now, having said that, the next step on the stage, she thinks, is rhetoric. And let me just say this also. This information is 20, 30 years old. This is not new information. It's just new to us. Amy Gutman, that woman was the president of Penn State. This shit is new to us. It ain't new to them. They've been looking at the weaknesses within the context of the democratic system. Particularly white women have been looking at it, and they've been using their own theorization in order to have a more robust and substantive impact over decision making within the context of it. That's what they've been doing. We've been sitting back voting for the same niggas year after year after year, and we wonder why we got the same fucking results. And then we sit back and we wonder, Why is the same thing still standing? Like, why is there nothing happening? There's not what he can do. It's something that can be done, but first you got to know what to do. And what's preventing you from being able to do anything. And then when somebody says that you're out of pocket or you're out of line, how to tell them, no, what we're doing is democracy, lady or sir. What you're trying to do is you're trying to make us be externally excluded from the democratic process. Sorry, what you're doing is anti-democratic. And I can refer to the thoughts of X, Y, and Z philosopher to demonstrate to you why it is anti-democratic, what you're doing. You're engaged in oppressive political processes. It's just that simple. But we don't have the wherewithal to do it because first of all, we need to fucking listen. You can't do shit without listening first. We talked about being open-minded yesterday. That's one of the civic virtues that many black people don't have at all. Open-mindedness? Niggas think they know everything. Niggas think they know every goddamn thing. Now tell me I'm right or wrong. Niggas think they know everything. Niggas think they got all the shit already figured out. Can't rub two fucking nickels together. Can't motherfucking rub two sticks together to make a fire, but they know every goddamn thing. They'll tell you to shut your ass up, be quiet, this nigga ain't this nigga ain't that, and they can't rub two fucking sticks together to make a fire. Ain't got a fucking pot to piss in the window to throw it out of, and ain't got a motherfucking educated idea. But they gonna tell you how to do it though. We gotta know what the game is, what's being played, and how to play the game also. That's why I'm here offering the information. And I goes off, man. I go off. I don't give a fuck, man. I don't care. Getting back to the lecture at hand. So I can let them understand. Along with greeting, rhetoric is another mode of communication that is supposed to expand the inclusivity of democracy. So we talked about greeting. Now we're going to talk about rhetoric. Now, it's important for people to know, if you don't know, in philosophical circles, rhetoric is commonly regarded as subordinate to rational speech. Meaning people think that rhetoric is lesser than, subordinate to, of lower value than that of rational speech. Rational speech is speech that is characterized as dispassionate, logical, stylistically neutral, impartial, and universalistic, while rhetoric is speech that is described as emotional, illogical, figurative, self-interested, and particularistic. Those who favor rational speech over rhetoric presuppose that reason can be disembodied from cultural specificity, rendering such speech the principal means by which to articulate objective truth. And when I say rendering such speech, meaning rational speech, the principal means by which to articulate objective truth. Let me repeat it. Those who favor rational speech over rhetoric presuppose that reason can be disembodied from cultural specificity. But pretending that speech can be disembodied and disembedded in this way is a cultural fiction. All discursive content and argument is embodied in situated style and rhetoric. Rhetoric then becomes a feature of political expression to which we ought to attend in our engagement with one another rather than an aspect of expression we try to bracket off in order to truly be rational. Because white people have a culture and they're culturally specific also. There is no objective, impartial mode of communication. It doesn't exist. Everything is culturally specific to some extent or another. That's the argument that's being made here. So the point again illustrated is that rational speech, which is purportedly emotionally neutral and objective, is itself a form of rhetorical communication. So rhetoric can't just be ignored as a viable mode of communication for deliberative democratic theory. Now, many of you don't even know what the difference between rhetoric and argumentation is. But I'm going to try to make it clear and plain for you. Rhetoric includes several other features of communication that often intersect and complement each other. One such feature is the emotional tone of the discourse. Like you can start off a rhetorical conversation and create a tone of anger, one of fear, or one of emotional distance or detachment. But every discourse that you engage in is going to have some sort of tone. So that's one feature of discourse. It's the emotional tone. The second feature of rhetoric is that it employs a figure of speech in order to help color the tone of a particular discourse. The third is that it often makes use of communication that does not consist of speech. Like you can have signs, banners, a large numbers of protesters. And the last feature of rhetoric is that all of the aforementioned aspects are often combined together and directed towards a specific group or audience. Idioms and arguments that resonate with a particular group are often used to persuade that group. Politicians are masters of this shit. They use rhetoric all the time, even though they try to hide it. Now, while Young champions the use of rhetoric in deliberative democratic theory, a lot of people reject it. A lot of people reject it. There's a philosopher by the name of Jürgen Habermas. Don't expect for you to know who he is. But he argues against rhetoric in deliberative settings because he thinks that rhetoric can be used to strategically manipulate people who are listening. But in response to this, Young says, look, all speech, even speech that is thought to be purely rational, contains what they call perlocutionary aspects. And Young puts it in the following way. While it's appropriate to distinguish between communicative acts that aim to further understanding and cooperation and those that operate strategically as a means of using others for one's own ends, this distinction cannot be made by means of a distinction between purely rational and merely rhetorical speech. So Young recognizes basically that reducing all political argument to rhetoric seems to admit that the political stage is not as it should be. Because ideally, the political stage should be free of manipulative elements and strategical elements. However, she affirms what she thinks to be three positive effects that rhetoric has among participants who face collective problems or political conflicts. First, rhetoric often helps to get an issue on the agenda of deliberation. Bottom line, privileged groups typically dominate the establishment of the political agenda and they ignore the interests and concerns of marginalized groups. They just ignore it. But rhetoric can break up this kind of domination. Now, you can't guarantee that rhetoric is going to get your viewpoint in the agenda or brought to the public attention. But upon the event that it's not taken up, well, what do you have to lose? At the very least, you can help bring issues that would otherwise be neglected to the public's attention. This is why I say Ice Cube, good move. Second, she says rhetoric fashions claims and arguments in ways appropriate to a particular public in a particular situation. Many deliberative democratic theorists claim that reasons are offered in public settings have to be presented in a way that everybody can accept them, which is what Gutman and Thompson do. They argue that norms of publicity require that reasons be presented in ways that are inclusive and flexible enough so that everybody can potentially modify them. That is, reasons should not restrict or be restrictive, be private, or aimed at particular audiences. Young agrees that, reasons should be presented in such a way that the moral dignity of others is maintained, but she insists that all political discussion is situated and contextualized, and all political arguments are presented to specific groups with specific interests. Therefore, rhetoric should be used to help develop modes of expression that present reasons that can be publicly affirmed, but resonate well with specific audiences. And basically the point here is that one mode of communication, dispassionate and emotionless speech, is neither adequate nor useful within the context of a multicultural and a pluralistic society. Finally, she says rhetoric motivates the move from reason to judgment. Although actors in deliberative settings make use of reasons to solve political problems, their main goal generally is not to reach consensus or agreement or to establish a regulative ideal or constitutional principles. The participants in deliberative settings aim their efforts towards solving concrete problems. And therefore, their deliberative efforts are aimed primarily towards making judgments about how to best solve those problems. Rhetoric is important because it contextualizes and situates rational judgment, and if necessary, provides the appropriate motivational grounds for accepting one reason over equally compelling ones. So, in summary, Young basically says rhetoric is a mode of communication that ought to be used in order to criticize exclusion and to promote inclusion. Far too often, minorities, blacks, Latinos, Asians, working class white people, gays, whatever, are excluded from the deliberative process because privileged groups are not comfortable with the way they express and comport themselves. But the way a person innately expresses himself should not have a bearing on the usefulness or appropriateness of their reasons or the content of their expressions. Instead, the reason or expression should either stand or fall on its own merits. The use of rhetoric is a way of reaching outward to others from different groups and making the attempt to communicate with them in ways that resonate with them. In this sense, the use of rhetoric is a way of building bridges between groups with different modes of expression. It is a mode of communication that acknowledges or recognizes other groups' cultural norms and customs. Now, what can we learn from this? We can learn from this that as black people, because it even happens internally amongst us. We could be more attuned to each other's differences and try to use terms that are not insulting to other people. Do at least try to. Black men and women can learn from this. But I assume that we won't. I don't think that we will. But at least we can begin to develop better practices, even if others don't. Thank you, Ronan Martin, for becoming a member again and renewing your membership. Appreciate that. Nelson, thank you, sir, for the donation. And the last thing I want to talk about is narrative, because she says you got greeting, rhetoric, and narrative. I've talked about each of those. The last thing I'm going to do is talk about narrative. And then after that, I'm going to close off and end this. And then I'm going to do one more show about this, but I can't do it tomorrow because I'm going to have a show with Clea Monago. And we're going to talk about black men who are straight, black men who are same gender loving or gay, whatever you want to call it, and find out what's the smoke. Why is there all this animosity between each other? Why are there members from the LGBTQ community coming in and having conversations saying straight black men or the white people or black people? Like, what the fuck is that all about? I would like to know from somebody who's a member of the community who's same gender loving, or who, you know, more commonly in American culture are called gay. What's that shit about? Why you gotta diss us to big yourself up? That's what I'm trying to figure that out, because I don't understand it. I don't comprehend it. So that's gonna be a conversation I have tomorrow. Monday, I'm gonna have a conversation about General Electric and about how they, as a multimedia company, perpetuate anti-black misandry. So Tuesday, I'll be able to come up and tell you why we're going over now is not adequate. Even though it is deliberative democratic theory, and I, for the most part, agree with deliberative democratic goals and aims, I think that this woman is naive. So let me take a quick break again, and when we come back, I'll get to the rest of this, and then we'll be done for this evening. We're back. I'm the G with a PhD. You're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel, the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up, no chaser. I'm trying to give you some information about democracy and what it is and what it's not, and the kind of norms that apply within the domain of democracy. That's what I'm here to do. Okay? Now, last thing I'm going to talk about is narrative. And then after that, we're going to be done. And it ain't going to take too much longer. Just a little bit, maybe about 10 minutes. Now, we talked about greeting. We talked about rhetoric. We're going to talk about narrative. And greeting, rhetoric, and narrative are supposed to be able to subvert or to mitigate internal exclusion. And internal exclusion is when you got people present in a deliberative fora, but people overlook these so-called included persons because they don't speak like, don't act like, don't talk like, don't comport like the people who normally predominate these kind of fora or these public forums. So this is why she argues for expanded communication, so that more people are allowed to take part in deliberative democratic processes. So she says sometimes internal exclusions occur because citizens don't possess shared understandings. This lack of shared understanding of cultural values prevents them from being able to mutually engage in substantive dialogue. In such situations, privileged groups often dominate the discourse and devalue the experiences and expressions of less privileged groups. Now, what Young does is she basically says, look, narrative is a mode of communication that helps to remedy the problem. Narrative fosters understanding among citizens with divergent experiences and outlooks on life, enhancing their ability to empathize with one another. Now, according to Young, political narrative should be distinguished from narrative in general. Political narrative is not meant to entertain or to highlight the facets of a particular person's life. Instead, it is communicated with the intention of highlighting a specific political point. In her own words, political narrative is used to demonstrate, describe, explain, or to justify something to others in an ongoing political discussion. So for Young, narrative is a means by which to generate mutual understanding through differences. And it does so in several ways. Now, the first way narrative creates a response to something called the differend. She borrows some arguments from some French postmodern philosopher named Jean-Francois Lyotard. Don't expect for you to know who he is. But she basically says that injustices occur when those who suffer from deep wrongs don't possess the terms to express those wrongs within the confines of the prevailing discourse. And although such suffering can't be explicitly expressed by victims in such circumstances, they can tell their stories, which reveals or discloses injustices and makes others aware of them, often leading to new terms to express such injustices. This is how the development of the term sexual harassment and the awareness of it as an injustice was the direct result of women's narratives. Now, maybe perhaps some men need to start making their own narratives in order to express their own political points, to demonstrate, describe, or explain, or to justify something to others in an ongoing political discussion. But our narratives are not heard. A lot of times, black men don't even want to speak about their narratives. Just keep it all bottled up inside. Second, narrative encourages the facilitation of local publics and the articulation of collective affinities. That's a lot. But the idea is something that she borrows from a feminist philosopher named Nancy Fraser. Local publics or subaltern counterpublics are cooperatives of people who share similar circumstances or suffer similar problems. Together, they can use narrative to communicate their unique concerns and come to perceive their identities as being inextricably tied to others similarly situated. And they can use their collective power to politicize the injustices of their experiences. Is this not what the manosphere is trying to do? The black manosphere? To use narrative to communicate their unique concerns and come to perceive their identities as being inextricably tied to others similarly situated? Is that not what this is about? The third thing she says is that narrative helps to understand the experience of others and to counter pre-understandings and prejudice. So narrative allows for citizens who are situated differently from other groups to give those others a first-hand account of their own unique experiences. So although privileged groups may not share any similar kinds of experiences as those who are marginalized, the telling of stories is a useful way to get privileged groups to understand the plight of marginalized citizens and to use those understandings in their public considerations. Also, narrative helps those who are marginalized to aim at prejudices that others use to stigmatize them. Anecdotally, marginalized citizens can set the record straight by pinpointing and neutralizing common stereotypes. Fourth, narrative reveals the sources of marginalized groups' values, priorities, or cultural meanings. Through narrative, the outsiders may come to understand why the insiders value what they value and why they have the priorities they have. The illustration of cultural meanings that narratives translates generally cannot be clarified by use of arguments. Instead, myths, allegories, creation stories, and so on and so forth are often used to explain the values and norms of different groups. The point here is that when shared understandings are thin and narrow, narrative can help to thicken and to broaden them. And lastly, narrative aids in constructing social knowledge that enlarges thought. Far too often, privileged groups view the world in a distorted and a one-sided manner. Beyond this, privileged groups have an idealized but distorted view of themselves. Narratives that illustrate how people who are marginalized or differently situated see the world and how they perceive the behavior and character of privileged groups broadens the knowledge social base. More information from a variety of social perspectives leads to a more informed public, which renders it more likely to employ the most practical judgment available to itself. So there you have it. You have 3 expanded modes of communication that are supposed to enhance the quality of collective decision making. And it's offered by Iris Young. Now, I'm not going to say, at one time I thought that she was on to something, but now I kind of disagree. And I won't be able to tell you until Tuesday why I disagree. But I think that more people included in the democratic process is a good thing. I think that right now black men are excluded from it. Although it's assumed that our needs are actually taken up within it. I know for a fact black men's interests are not being absorbed into the politics right now, especially the Democratic Party, because as soon as a black man said anything that was contrary to what a group of people wanted or desired within the confines of the political, at that moment, they just went out and said, shut up, fuck you. That's not democratic at all. That's oppressive. That's dictation. That's tyranny. That's not democracy. We need to be able to point to these people and say, look, the norms that you're demonstrating are anti-democratic. Bottom line. This shit you're doing is not democracy. I don't know what it is, but it's not democracy. Once you know the norms, then you can just sit it down on the table and say, look, so if I decide what you don't like, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to begin to communicate to me that my viewpoint is patriarchy. Like, I mean, how can you just come out and tell me what the fuck I'm thinking? Do you know my story? Do you know my narrative? Do you know my story? Maybe I'm going to have to draw you out of your position of comfortability with some rhetoric to let you know we're not going to sit here and allow you to continue to call us these evil and these ignorant names. Maybe perhaps we need to meet and greet each other so you get to know who the fuck I am instead of you telling me who the fuck I am. Maybe you need to be reintroduced to me so you know who the fuck I am instead of you telling me who the fuck I am. See, a lot of norms associated with democracy, these people are breaking them all across the board in order to get what they want. All I'm trying to do is arm you with knowledge such that you can pinpoint and demonstrate to these people how the norms that they're using, they're not even using norms, they're using strategy in order to co-opt and to basically get what they want. That's not democracy, man. That's political maneuvering. And black men don't have to sit back and take that shit. They don't. That is oppression. And as soon as we learn how to articulate that it is oppression, as soon as we learn how to do that, the better off we'll be. I'm not impressed with the idea of going to vote so I can make sure that a whole bunch of token Negroes are involved in politics. Why would I do that? That's ignorant as hell to me. But that's what black people are doing right now. That's what we feel the move is related to politics. All I'm trying to do is offer you up some norms so that when you see injustice taking place, or when you see people being excluded from the process of democracy, to know what it looks like and to be able to present arguments on why and how to resist against your own exclusion. Because right now, black men are externally excluded from politics. This is a fact. And there's shaming tactics being used, threats being used, coercion being used, name calling being used. A whole host of injustices are being used in order to exclude black men from the political process. This shit has got to stop. But all I'm trying to say is inclusion in democratic processes, that's useful. I get it. I understand it. It makes sense to some degree. But there's a reason why, and I can only get to this Tuesday. I can't get to it until Tuesday. There's a reason why being in politics or being present in a sea of sharks is not useful. But black people understood this even in the 60s. Kwame Ture in the 70s. Kwame Ture was like tokenism and having a black face in a white space. It doesn't add up to political power for black people. A whole bunch of black women in political positions is not going to add up or amount to a whole bunch of freedom for black women. It's not. Or health or happiness or well-being. It's not. Any more than when Obama was the president of the United States, that black men throughout the United States were happy. How much, what fucking positive impact did that have on your life? Did you feel great about yourself? The black men, did you feel good as a black man? My president is black. I thought that was the same president under which a fucking riot broke out in Ferguson. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I was living in an alternate universe where it was a white man that was the president when Mike Brown got shot and killed and Tamar Rice got shot and killed by the fucking police. And then maybe it was a white man to sign a bill into law about how to protect the police and to further entrench qualified immunity. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe I was sleeping, dreaming and shit, and it was actually a white president. Or was it Barack Obama? Having a black face in a white space is not going to bring about black freedom or black democracy. It ain't going to do it. It ain't going to bring about black autonomy. It ain't been happening. So what's going to make it happen all of a sudden? Because you got a whole bunch of black women in there. I'm just asking the question. Thank you, TD Hip Hop Media, for the donation. Thank you, Nelson, for the donation. All I'm saying is, maybe I'm confused. Maybe I don't know what was going on. Maybe I was in an alternate universe somewhere. But having black faces and white spaces don't necessarily mean that black people all of a sudden going to have an increased and an enhanced value of life. Only black people can do that. Only black people holding politicians accountable can do that. Only making demands upon politicians and making sure that they are accountable can do that. Only organizing can do that. But right now, we're under the impression that only one group or demographic can actually be engaged in the organizing process. Or that black people should have fidelity to one particular party. And that the way that we demonstrate or exercise our autonomy as black people is through voting. This is just absolutely quixotic. It's idealistic fairy tales. You got to get your hands dirty, man. Black people got a lot of work to do. A lot. And black people in the manosphere got more work to do than most. We have to begin to develop narratives and stories and to develop rhetoric and to determine the ways in which we're being externally and internally excluded from the process. And the reduction of our motivations, everything we do to patriarchy and wanting to be white, that shit has to come to a close. Because in and of itself, that's prejudice. That they've been relying on that narrative for far too long. At some point, we got to have real conversations. But the conversation is blocked. It is stale. Anytime you keep hearing the same rhetoric over and over again and it doesn't change, and there's no new extension of meanings such that we can become and get to a position where there are new understandings and new language evolving, then you know we haven't moved at all. But anyway, man, having said that, man, it's a Saturday night. I wanted to get in early. I wanted to be done with this by 7. I was going to go on at 7, but I was like, nah, I ain't doing that. But again, tomorrow, got to come in because we're going to have a conversation with a black man who's done a lot of activism and work for same gender loving black men. And he uses a different kind of perspective than normal people in the LGBTQ community. So I just want to have a conversation with him and find out what the hell is all this beef and this smoke coming from between straight black men and gay black men. What the fuck is this? So stay tuned for that tomorrow because I think that's going to be an interesting conversation. So having said all that, man, I'm going to holler at y'all on the next again. I'll holler at y'all.
Yeah. I'm a phenomenon, I shine like Orion. I came in a rap gang to smack it up like Heron, transform it like Megatron. Wait, like Yamatron, most rappers are some peons. I'ma starve them like Ramadan, I'm troublesome. You don't really want no troublesome, cause I pop guns like hood chicks do bubble gum. I been dumb, gon' stay that way till kingdom come. When the sun I'm at, unleash a demon, a Polygon. I'm heavy, son, got more common knowledge that Farrakhan more gain than cap. Come that bitch some ning done one. Stay lit off some Shandan. Maybe about they ram. Stay drink to some Nordstrom. Call me that Dapper Don. More violent than Genghis Khan. The members of Taliban. Niggas faker than Silicon. Get hit like a .com. Like soldiers in Lebanon. I'm bringing that red rum. When I get through with you, son, you gon' think I'll see rap. I carry weight like a heavyweight. Bake more cakes than patty cake. Watch the fiend salivate. You a lightweight, phantom weight. Better contemplate. If you violate, make you levitate to the pearly gates. I fascinate when I conversate from the show me state where these niggas left the hate and hot murder rate. What a waste. But this flow is just a taste of God's grace. Shining this light in the ugly place. In the prophecy, got more wisdom than Socrates' philosophies. You don't really want no parts of me. Can't you see? I'm slicker than Mephistopheles, stronger than Hercules, more dangerous than the Damocles. The MCs trying me pretty please. I wet up they white tees, knock them out they wallabies. Now they touch my deliries. But coming up short of the little C's when I break out the killer bees. I study music like Ocasio, hit chicks look like Ashanti. When I'm breaking them off, they yell at odd poppy. You rack rappers is sloppy, you can't stop me with that. We can sorry, copy, malarkey. I'm a monster like Frankenstein, rock harder than Palestine. You slimes, dropping dimes, a snake and serpentine. Can't stand to see me glow like Nas with his big shine. All you haters cold in it, cold sores need calamine. But my hot shit like red bricks hitting your head, leave the sour taste up in your mouth like lemon heads, like Simply Red. Wasted some years up in the feds when I touched down. Already red, that gave me head. I got higher vision for higher living. I'm highly driven. I'm acting women like it's some sort of sick religion. Driving an Impala, sitting on it, these 20 inches, and they spinning just like the planets in the solar system.
Black country people, over in Africa, down to America. Black country people, we make all the world go round and around, yes. Black country people, up in Canada, down to Jamaica. Black country people, we make all the world go round and around.